What if we told you that the president of Nigeria, the giant of Africa, might be a secret asset of the CIA? According to official reports from U.S. intelligence agencies, Bola Tinubu, the very person Nigerians trust to lead them, might be playing a very different game. And it's not just a theory. These agencies, including the CIA, FBI, and DEA, have allegedly confirmed it. So, what does this all mean? Let's find out. U.S. intelligence agencies have outright said that President Bola Tinubu is an active asset. An asset, meaning that this guy, who's supposed to be running Nigeria, is allegedly serving a much bigger purpose. One that aligns with U.S. interests. The CIA, FBI, and DEA, yeah, they all know about it. They've said it out loud. Let that sink in. These aren't just small, run-of-the-mill agencies. They're the agencies that shape global policy and have the power to pull strings at the highest levels. The CIA alone has a history of involvement in covert operations that span across decades, from overthrowing governments to influencing elections. These are the same agencies that, when they claim someone is an asset, it means that person is playing a role much more significant than just being a public figure. They're integral to a larger strategy. Now here's where it gets interesting and a little fishy. U.S. agencies didn't just throw out this claim and walk away like it's no big deal. No, they fought tooth and nail to keep the details locked up. Why? Because releasing full information about Tinubu's alleged CIA ties could apparently jeopardize national security. Yeah, okay, that's the usual excuse for hiding something dirty under the rug. But here's the thing. National security? For whom? The U.S. government has long justified its actions abroad by using the phrase national security to cover up a multitude of covert operations. Look at Latin America in the 20th century, where the U.S. orchestrated regime changes, often to the detriment of local populations, all under the guise of national security. If we're being honest, national security is often just a euphemism for maintaining a geopolitical advantage, especially when it serves the interests of Washington. What exactly is the U.S. trying to protect here? Could it be that they're keeping the truth from the public because it makes them look bad? Let's think about it. The CIA has a long history of involvement in Africa, from the Cold War days to modern conflicts, where they've supported both overt and covert operations aimed at influencing leadership across the continent. The U.S. has a well-documented history of backing certain leaders and groups in Africa to counter the influence of rivals, whether it be the Soviet Union or China. In the 1960s and 1970s, the U.S. was heavily involved in supporting various African regimes, often choosing leaders who could align with U.S. geopolitical and economic interests, rather than those who represented the will of the people. These covert relationships were kept under wraps for decades, only coming to light much later, sometimes only after the damage was already done. Now, this isn't just about one man. We're talking about a foreign leader who might be more loyal to Washington than to his people. Makes you wonder, what else are they hiding? Is there more to the story that they're not telling us? And if Tinubu is a CIA asset, how far does this influence extend? Could this explain some of his actions, his decisions, or even his priorities as president? Just think about his major policy shifts and foreign policy decisions since taking office. His relationships with key international players, especially with countries like the US, Saudi Arabia, and even Israel, raise questions about who benefits from his presidency. Is he making decisions that align with Nigeria's national interests? Or is he furthering an agenda that suits a foreign power? How much of his stance on issues like oil exports, military alliances, or economic policy is being shaped by a greater international strategy? The questions don't stop there. This isn't a light accusation. These agencies have all but confirmed Tinubu's ties to the U.S. government, which means that the implications for Nigeria and Africa could be massive. If a sitting president is beholden to another country's intelligence services, what does that mean for his legitimacy, for his sovereignty, and what does that say about Nigeria's position on the world stage? Let's not forget that Nigeria is Africa's most populous country and one of its biggest economic powers. A country this significant should have leadership that answers first to its people, not to foreign interests. If Tinubu's allegiance is with the U.S., then where does that leave the Nigerian people? But let's take it even further. What does this mean for the rest of Africa? Africa has spent decades fighting against colonialism and neo-colonialism, and here we are again, faced with the possibility that a foreign power might still hold sway over one of its key leaders. Could this be a wake-up call for the entire continent? Could this be the moment when African nations realize the extent to which their sovereignty is constantly under threat? Not just from external military powers, but from intelligence agencies operating in the shadows? We've seen how the US has influenced African politics in the past. Think about the US's involvement in the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba in Congo, or the way they supported various African regimes in the Cold War as part of their global strategy to contain communism. The same dynamics might be at play today, but the world has changed, and the global community is watching more closely than ever. The secrecy around this issue begs even more questions. If the US is working so hard to suppress this information, does that mean they're involved in other, even more deeply hidden operations around the world? Could it be that Tinubu is just one of many leaders who are part of a larger network of foreign assets being propped up by the US for strategic purposes? Is the US playing the same geopolitical game it's always played, but this time with a new cast of characters? And more importantly, how far is this influence reaching? What does it mean when a foreign power has such a significant influence over a nation's leader? How does it affect national decision-making, economic priorities, and even military alliances? As we think about this, we need to ask, what's really at stake here? What happens if this information is released to the public? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. We've only just scratched the surface here. The more we dig into this issue, the more it becomes clear. Nigeria is not just fighting for its sovereignty on the world stage, but for its right to have a leadership that isn't beholden to foreign interests. As we continue to explore these deeper layers of influence, we begin to realize just how much power is concentrated in the hands of a few, and how far-reaching the consequences of this covert relationship could be for Nigeria, Africa, and the world. Trust me, what comes next will only deepen the mystery and reveal just how far this influence goes. If you are thinking Tinubu was known as a good president and this is just a criticism, then let us ask you, why was Bola Tinubu known as the Flying President? Tinubu's constant trips abroad have earned him a new nickname, the Flying President. And you're probably thinking, what's the big deal? He's just doing his job as Nigeria's leader, right? Well, that's what he'd like you to believe. But here's the thing. Isn't it a little odd that Tinubu spends more time flying around the world than dealing with the mess on the ground in Nigeria? Let's pause and think about the situation in Nigeria. The country is facing numerous internal challenges: rampant poverty, political unrest, security issues, and a stagnating economy. With all this going on, shouldn't Nigeria's president be focused more on his backyard? Shouldn't he be actively engaged with domestic issues and leading efforts to solve the problems that are directly affecting his people? But no, Bola Tinubu seems to be everywhere except in Nigeria, making one international trip after another. It's almost as though he's using his position to tour the world, instead of doing the hard work required to stabilize his nation. Sure, he meets with world leaders and represents Nigeria in international forums, which on the surface seems like part of his job as a leader. But come on, you're telling me that a country with serious internal issues doesn't need more of his attention? When the country's citizens are struggling with inflation, unemployment, and a devastating insurgency crisis, you have to wonder, why is he spending so much time abroad? What are these meetings really about? Some critics have raised the point that these frequent trips might not be just about diplomacy. They could be about something bigger. In fact, what if these international travels are not truly in Nigeria's best interest, but are aligned with the interests of the US or other global powers? Let's break it down. If the CIA is backing him, as some suggest, could Tinubu be serving as more of a go-between for US interests rather than prioritizing Nigeria's future? We know that the US has a long history of involvement in Africa, shaping leadership across the continent to benefit its geopolitical and economic interests. Could Tinubu be an extension of that strategy? Think about it. What if his diplomatic engagements aren't just about representing Nigeria, but about serving a greater agenda that doesn't necessarily benefit the Nigerian people? You see, Tinubu's diplomatic travel schedule might just be a cover-up for something more sinister. If his ties to the US are as deep as they're being claimed, then his frequent travels could serve as a channel through which he advances foreign interests, specifically US objectives. For example, during his time abroad, Tinubu has met with leaders from powerful nations like the US, Saudi Arabia, and China, countries that have significant influence in global politics and economics. But here's the kicker. When you look closely at his trips, it often seems like his visits align with moments where Nigeria's direct involvement in global events is either irrelevant or secondary. This raises the question, what role is Tinubu playing? Is he truly acting as a representative of Nigeria, or is he fulfilling a much more covert function for a global superpower, even if it means Nigeria's interests take a back seat? Let's take a moment to consider the timing of some of his trips. For example, his meetings with world leaders often coincide with major international events where Nigeria's input might be minimal, yet Tinubu is present. Why? Is he attending these events to secure deals or just to show up for appearances? In some cases, his presence doesn't seem to be centered around urgent Nigerian matters. Instead, it looks like he's being positioned as a middleman between the US and other global players. This isn't about serving Nigeria. It's about serving a much larger global agenda. His actions on the international stage appear to be more about cultivating relationships that might secure Nigeria's position in a new world order of economic and political alliances. But is Nigeria benefiting from this? Or is Tinubu simply furthering the interests of the very powers that might be controlling his actions? What's most alarming is that these trips are becoming almost routine, as if his role as president is secondary to his role as an international emissary. A simple look at his travel schedule shows that the frequency of these trips has increased, almost as if there's a subtle shift in his priorities. When you're the president of a country with serious internal challenges, your first responsibility should be to tackle those problems head-on. But when it seems like your focus is more on engaging in international diplomacy rather than domestic governance, questions naturally arise. Is he truly acting on behalf of Nigeria, or is he just playing a part in someone else's game? We've only just touched on this, but the connection between his international travels and his alleged CIA ties is too important to ignore. So, how does this past, this murky history, fit into the puzzle? For that, let's talk about the president's past. The past. It always comes back to bite you, and in Tinubu's case, his past may be exactly why the CIA has him on their radar. Let's rewind to 1993. That's when Tinubu got caught up in a drug-related forfeiture case in the United States. Now, before you say it's not his fault because, after all, the legal battle wasn't directly against him, consider the fact that it still linked him to illegal activities. And that's where the problems start. Could this be the very reason the CIA sees him as a useful asset? Maybe the US doesn't mind the scandal in his past because, in their eyes, it gives them leverage. His past ties to illicit activities might just be the kind of thing that makes him easier to control. After all, someone with a dark past is easier to manipulate. And if the CIA has kept their eyes on him since then, well, we might have just stumbled upon the reason why. This isn't just about some shady backstory. This is about power. And we all know that power in politics often goes hand in hand with influence from foreign powers, especially when those powers stand to gain something. In Tinubu's case, could his past dealings with US interests be the perfect foundation for them to keep him in their pocket? You're probably wondering how deep this connection goes, and whether the US is pulling the strings. But don't go anywhere, because we're just getting started. This situation calls for a bigger question. How much power does a nation like the US have when it comes to shaping the leadership of another sovereign country? What's clear is that the influence might not just be limited to political decisions. It could stretch to matters of economic strategy, military alignment, and beyond. If this connection is as deep as some speculate, Nigeria might not just be dealing with a president in charge. It could be dealing with a puppet on a string. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the US isn't going to let that string slip. Now we're diving into the big one. What does this whole situation mean for Nigeria and Africa? If the claims about Bola Tinubu's alleged ties to the CIA are true, then this revelation could send shockwaves through the very fabric of Nigerian sovereignty. The implications for Nigeria's political future are enormous. Nigerians, already divided in their opinions about Tinubu's leadership, could find themselves facing a new, much more unsettling reality. Tinubu has been accused of corruption, power struggles, and even allegations surrounding his past. But if this new information about his potential connection to a foreign intelligence agency is confirmed, it could fundamentally shake the trust Nigerians have in their president and their entire political system. What happens when the leader of the most populous country in Africa is revealed to possibly be a puppet for a foreign power? Some Nigerians might say, "This is our leader, not a US puppet," rejecting the idea outright and rallying behind Tinubu as a symbol of national pride and independence. However, others might argue, well, this confirms what we already feared. The West is meddling in our politics. These fears aren't unfounded. Africa has long dealt with foreign interference, whether through colonial rule or modern economic and political manipulation. Nigerians might find themselves questioning their democracy. If their president is beholden to external forces, then who truly controls Nigeria? Does the power to make decisions lie within the hands of Nigerian citizens? Or is it just another case of a foreign power pulling the strings from behind the scenes? The plot thickens when you zoom out and look at Africa as a whole. Nigeria isn't just any African country, it's a major player on the continent. Its economy, political weight, and military influence are unparalleled in sub-Saharan Africa. If one of Africa's most powerful nations is reportedly under the sway of foreign intelligence agencies, the entire continent could start to question its position in the world. How many other African nations are also at risk of being influenced, or worse, controlled, by foreign powers? If the US can have this level of influence over Nigeria's leadership, how does this affect the decisions of other African leaders who may be more vulnerable to similar outside pressures? This raises important questions for the entire continent. What does this mean for African leadership, sovereignty, and the future of African politics? Will other African leaders start questioning their relationships with global powers like the US, China, or even former colonial masters in Europe? The balance of power in Africa has long been under scrutiny, with Western powers playing a significant role in shaping the political landscape through military, economic, and diplomatic means. The idea that a president of a major African country could be in the pocket of foreign intelligence agencies makes one wonder if this is just the tip of the iceberg. Could more African leaders be under similar pressure, either overtly or covertly? The notion that Africa's leadership could be manipulated in such a profound way should sound alarm bells across the continent. The situation is particularly critical when considering the broader implications of Africa's struggle for political independence. After decades of fighting colonial powers, Africa has, in many ways, fought to shake off external control and assert its own political and economic will. Yet the continent remains entangled in a complex web of foreign influence. From debt traps to military bases, foreign powers still have significant sway over Africa's ability to chart its course. This can be a moment of relief if the locals ask for truth and transparency. But let's see where this goes. What do you think happens next? Will African nations start realizing the full extent of foreign interference in their politics, or will they continue to play along? Let us know in the comments section. What do you see the future holds for Africans? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.